Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving into one of the wildest, most bizarre stories from Tudor England. A tale that involves prophecies, a teenage peasant girl, and a king on the verge of changing history forever. This is the incredible and tragic story of Elizabeth Barton, also known as the Holy Maid of Kent. Our story starts around 1525, not in the grand palaces of London, but in the humble village of Aldington in Kent. Here lived a young servant girl, probably around 16 years old, named Elizabeth Barton. By all accounts, she was just an ordinary girl until she fell gravely ill. This wasn't just a common cold. It was a severe, debilitating sickness that left her bedridden for months. During this illness, something extraordinary started to happen. Elizabeth began to have visions. She claimed to see the Virgin Mary and other saints who would give her messages about the future. She'd fall into trances, sometimes for days, and when she woke up, she would deliver these divine prophecies. Word of her visions spread like wildfire. Locals were amazed. Was this a miracle? Soon, people were flocking to her bedside to hear her speak and witness these trances for themselves. They called her the Holy Maid of Kent. Now, you might be thinking, was she for real? It's hard to say. Some accounts describe her physical contortions during these trances as truly terrifying, with her body twisting in ways that seemed unnatural. Others, however, would later claim it was all an act. But at the time, for the people of Kent, she was a living saint. One of her earliest famous prophecies was about a child in her master's household. She predicted the child would die, and it did. This only solidified her reputation. Her fame reached the ears of the Archbishop of Canterbury, William War. He was a powerful figure, and he was intrigued. He sent a commission to investigate Elizabeth. This group included a man named Edward Barton, a monk from Canterbury. Barton was immediately convinced of her holiness. He became her mentor, her spiritual guide, and some would say, her manager. Under Barton's guidance, Elizabeth's prophecies started to become a bit more political. She was miraculously cured during a pilgrimage to a local chapel, an event witnessed by a crowd of 2,000 people. After her recovery, she didn't return to her old life. Instead, she became a nun at St. Sepulchre's nunnery in Canterbury, with Barton as her confessor. This gave her a legitimate platform, a seal of religious approval. Her visions were no longer just local gossip. They were now matters of church and state. And this is where King Henry VIII enters the picture. At this time, Henry was a man on a mission. He was desperate for a male heir, and his wife, Catherine of Aragon, had only given him a daughter, Mary. He was convinced his marriage was cursed because Catherine had been his brother's widow. He wanted an annulment from the Pope so he could marry the captivating and This was the king's great matter, and it was shaking the foundations of England. Naturally, Elizabeth Barton had a vision about it. And her vision was not good news for Henry. She declared that God did not approve of the divorce. She claimed to have seen the exact spot in hell that was reserved for Henry if he went through with it. She said that if he married Anne Boleyn, he would die a villainous death within a month and would no longer be considered king in the eyes of God. This was incredibly dangerous territory. Criticizing the king was one thing, but prophesying his death and delegitimizing his rule, that was treason. Yet, for a while, Henry seemed hesitant. Why? Because Elizabeth Barton was popular. Really popular. The common people believed her. More importantly, powerful people believed her, including figures who were opposed to the divorce, like Bishop John Fisher and Sir Thomas More. Elizabeth even managed to get a face-to-face meeting with King Henry himself, twice. We don't know exactly what was said in those meetings, but she apparently repeated her warnings directly to his face. Imagine the nerve. A former servant girl telling the most powerful man in the kingdom that he was doomed. Henry, surprisingly, let her go. Perhaps he was a little spooked. In an age of deep superstition, even a king might think twice before ignoring a messenger from God. Or maybe he just thought she was a harmless, hysterical woman. But as Henry's break with the Catholic Church became more inevitable, his patience wore thin. By 1533, he had cast Catherine of Aragon aside, married a pregnant Anne Boleyn, and declared himself the supreme head of the Church of England. Elizabeth Barton's prophecy that he would die within a month had failed to come true. This was the moment his new right-hand man, the ruthless Thomas Cromwell, had been waiting for. Cromwell saw Elizabeth Barton not as a holy woman, but as a political threat. She was a figurehead for the opposition, a symbol of resistance to the new religious order. He couldn't have that. So, in the autumn of 1533, Cromwell ordered the arrest of Elizabeth and her closest followers, including her mentor, Edward Buck. They were taken to the Tower of London and interrogated. What happened next is murky, but under intense pressure, Elizabeth Barton confessed. She signed a document admitting that all her visions, all her prophecies, her entire holy persona had been a complete fraud from the very beginning. She said she had faked it all for attention and profit. Her confession was then publicly read out at St. Paul's Cross in London, a humiliating public spectacle designed to destroy her credibility completely. But was the confession genuine, or was it coerced? We'll likely never know for sure. It's entirely possible that a terrified young woman facing a master interrogator like Cromwell in the Tower of London would say anything to make the torments stop. Some historians believe she might have genuinely believed her own visions at first. But later, under the influence of political players like Buck, her prophecies were manipulated for their own agenda. Whatever the truth, the confession sealed her fate. Cromwell wasn't just going to let her fade into obscurity. He needed to make an example of her. She and her key associates, including Barking, were condemned to death by an act of attainder, which meant they didn't even get a proper trial. On April 20th, 1534, Elizabeth Barton, the Holy Maid of Kent, was taken to Tyburn, the notorious site of public executions in London. On the scaffold, she gave a final speech. According to reports, she retracted her confession of fraud, but admitted to wrongdoing. She said she was just a poor wench without learning who had been manipulated by learned men. She begged for God's and the king's forgiveness. Then she was hanged. Her head was cut off and placed on a spike on London Bridge, the first and only woman ever to be given that gruesome honor. Her co-conspirators met the same fate. So, what's the legacy of Elizabeth Barton? Was she a genuine mystic, a political pawn, a clever fraud, or a mentally ill young woman who got caught up in something far beyond her control? The answer is probably a mix of all of the above. Her story is a powerful reminder of how dangerous it was to speak out against Henry VIII. She was a symbol of the old Catholic England that Henry was determined to destroy. By crushing her, Henry and Cromwell sent a clear message. No one, not even someone believed to speak for God, was safe from the king's wrath. Her execution silenced one of the most prominent voices of opposition to the royal divorce and the English Reformation. It was a chilling demonstration of the Tudor state's power. It's a truly fascinating and tragic story from a turbulent time in history. A teenage girl from a small village who, for a few years, held the attention of a nation and dared to challenge a king. It just goes to show you that sometimes the most incredible stories are the ones that are actually true. What do you guys think? Was she a saint or a sinner? A prophet or a puppet? Let me know your theories down in the comments. Thanks so much for watching. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into Tudor history, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more. See you next time!